Hey Savvy people, it's Savvy Nick here, and today we'll be continuing our C++ programming series by installing, using, and talking about source control in Visual Studio Code. This is a great tool for programmers because it's a way to keep track of changes to your code. Source control keeps a line-by-line copy of your code and is used by most programmers and companies to keep track of what they've done. Imagine not having a way to track your code, and if one day a bug develops in that code, well, source control makes this easy to look back at your changes and see where something could have gone wrong. It's a great tool to understand how to use, and we're specifically going to use Git for our source control. So I already have Git brought up here for installation purposes, and I also have a repo ready for our simple list program, so we can pull that down and see how everything integrates with Visual Studio Code. So there's actually a bunch of ways to use Git, but we'll go ahead and focus on using it through Visual Studio Code since that's the IDE we're using to create our simple list program. So to first start out, we'll make sure to install Git, and I'm here on the Git website with some download information in front of me about how to get it for Linux or a Unix system. As you can see here below, we have all these different options. So if you have a Debian Ubuntu based system, we can simply get it by just applying this into a terminal. And specifically for Ubuntu, for having the latest stable Git version, we'd have to do this command. So depending on what system you're using, you can also install Fedora, Gentoo, Arch Linux, OpenSUSE, Mageia, Nix, FreeBSD, and a few more down here. That's just in case you're following along in some kind of a different Linux operating system. So let's go ahead and launch a terminal to make sure that we do have something installed. Let me make this a little bigger so you can see it better. And what I'll do is actually I'll just go ahead, since I have Ubuntu here, I'm going to go ahead and copy this line of code here and then execute it in the terminal. It says I must be root, and of course I do, so we want to add sudo in front of that. Paste that in. Again, I'll make sure to go ahead and leave this link in the description below so you can get to it. Go ahead and put your password in for administrative privileges. Give it a moment here. So I really didn't see it install anything, so I'm just going to do this manually here. So sudo apt-get update, since we pull down a specific repo, and then we'll just do apt install git. Make sure that we have that. And I forgot sudo in front of that. So sudo apt-get install git, and we can install it, so we will finish that install. I'm not sure why their command didn't work before, but as it says here, we just do apt-get install git, and that should get the Git package for us on Ubuntu. Next, we'll go ahead and test it by just doing git, I believe, version here, and that's not a command because I'm missing one more dash. And now we can see we have Git version 2.250. So this is really a prerequisite to go ahead and download Git in order to use it with Visual Studio Code, because Visual Studio Code does not come with it. Alright, so I'm on the GitHub repository page for Simple List, where I'm going to show you how to go ahead and clone the Simple List repository so you have it locally on your computer, and you can continue working on the Simple List project with me. Or if you haven't started already, you can clone it down as well and continue from the current episode. Make sure to take a moment and like the video if you've made it this far. It really does help me out. So after you have Git installed, you can go ahead and click on this link here. I'll make sure to go ahead and put this repo in the description below as well, so you can go ahead and get to it. And you really have two options. You can copy this right here, or you can download the zip file. The main difference here is this is just a manual way of doing it. I highly suggest doing it through terminal using git clone. It'll copy the repository over better. I've had issues in the past doing the download zip. So if we go ahead and copy this, we can go ahead and start a terminal up. And in terminal, all we have to do is navigate to the directory where we want to save the repository. So I'm just going to save it somewhere like, let's see, home, Savvy Nick, and then I'll put it, let's see, I'll put it on the desktop. So after I've navigated to my desktop, I'll go ahead and do git clone. So clone is a command that comes with git, which actually pulls down the repository to your local computer. So anytime you want to pull down a repository that uses git as its source control, you can use the git clone command and then paste in the repository's URL, which we just copied. Go ahead, press enter, and then you may or may not be asked for a username and password if it's the first time using git clone, or if a repository requires a user and password in order to go ahead and download the repository, you will be asked for those credentials. But mine doesn't, so it's all fine here. And I'm just going to list what's on the desktop, and you can see here we do have simple list now. So let's navigate into simple list, and let me just do it a graphical way. So I'm going to start up files and just go to my desktop here, and you can see we have simple list. And if I click on simple list, you'll see a object folder, a source folder, a makefile, and a readme.md file, which is very similar to what we see here. Should be exactly the same actually. So object, source, makefile, readme.md. So now we have the repo cloned locally to our computer. So let's go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code again and open up that workspace. So we can do that multiple ways, but let's just do actually open this up, hit open folder, and if you got more than one opened up already, you can go through file and open folder as well. And I want to navigate to my desktop, so I'll go home and then hit the desktop location. And now I see simple list here. I'm going to double click on that and just hit OK. So Visual Studio Code will reload real quick, and now you can see that we have simple list here available as a project. What we're more concerned about is the source control, so let's go ahead and click on source control. And you can see here that there's no changes, but source control is Git, and it does recognize that your project has some form of source control using Git. So it automatically loaded some stuff in here for you. And what we can see here at the top, it says again source control Git, and then we can toggle our views depending on how we want either the folders displayed or just every single file displayed, and then a commit, as well as a few more options. We'll go through all that in a moment here. So let's go ahead and go back to Explorer. In order to track changes, we'll have to make a change. Right now there's no changes, so we don't see anything in our source control. So let's go ahead and make a change. I'm going to go into my source directory, and actually I want to make a change to list.cpp. So before we were working on this delete item function, and we sort of stubbed it out, but right now it has really no function. It just kind of lists out all the available items in our simple list to the user, but doesn't actually have the option of deleting it. So the first thing we want to do is, after we've asked them to go ahead and select an index number to delete, we'll go ahead, let me just delete this new line character, add a colon in and a space. That way, when the user enters in something in the terminal, it will show up on the same line as this message here. It'll just make it look a little cleaner. And then here in this blank space, we'll continue coding. So the first thing we want is an input from the user, and how we're going to do that is using sin again. And sin, we'll actually have to define some new variable here. Let's make it an integer, because it's going to be a number that they're going to choose from. And that integer, let's call it, let's see, choice num for choice number. And then we'll use sin in order to pass into choice number, the number that the user supplies to the terminal. After they press enter, we'll get that choice that they put in here in this choice number variable. So now we got to do something with this choice number variable, and that's delete an item from the list based on what number they had selected in a terminal. So in order to do that, we need access to our vector. Our vector is this list of items. So we'll do list dot. There's a function actually called erase with vectors. So you can see here, erase is available, and it comes with the standard vector, and we have a standard vector of strings that we created earlier. You can look at previous episodes in order to catch up on that and get an explanation for it as well. So erase is in a function, so we'll put the braces there, and then let me just put a semicolon in. And the reason it's complaining right now is it's saying, okay, you're going to use the function erase, but you haven't supplied any arguments to me yet. So what arguments are needed? Well, there's one that's what number you want to delete. So first we'll have to do another function, so list.begin, because currently we don't know where the vector list that we're keeping track of actually begins, and that's exactly what this function returns. It returns the location of the vector. And then we'll put a plus, and we'll just put our choice num. So what this effectively does is list begin will return where the list exists, and then we add choice number for whatever choice that the user selects to the beginning, effectively deleting the item that the user wants from the list with the use of the erase function of this object vector. So let's just go through this real quick. So if the user gave us a terminal input and the choice number was, let's say, 1, then the list, let's pretend it begins at some number 0. It would be 0 plus 1, meaning erase from the list 1 or the second location in the list, since our list began with 0. So if we run through it again, if the user gave us a 0 and the list began at 0 and their number choice was 0, it would erase the very first element, which is 0. Alright, after that's done, let's go ahead and just save it. And as you can see here, as soon as I saved it, I got this list CPP now kind of in a brownish color, and it says modified. Also, I got a little bubble here that says 1, and it's a pending change. So list CPP has changed, something has been modified. If we right click on here, we can look and do a couple things here. We can add it to a get ignore file, which we won't talk about today. But we can stage changes, discard changes, so if we want to get rid of the changes that we made, and even open changes. So let's go ahead and open changes so we can see them side by side. As you can see here in red, you can see stuff that we've deleted. In green, stuff that we've added. And we get a side-by-side comparison. The two results are what used to be there and what is there now. So this is a great way to look through code, compare it, and see what's been modified. And when a team of users is working on programming things together, source control becomes really the only way to keep track of everything in a proper manner. So now that I have these changes made, I'm going to go ahead and first test my changes. And then after I've tested them, if I'm convinced they work, I'll go ahead and push them to the GitHub repo online. So first thing I'm going to do is launch a new terminal here so I can do a make command and build my project again. Once I made the project, you can see that a bunch of files showed up here. It's because the compiler made some files, two object files as you can see here, and then another 2 files as well here, which have this U next to them, meaning untracked. So we're not keeping track of any of these files. They're all extra files and they get reproduced every single time you do make, so I don't want them in my main repo, so I'll keep them out. Next thing I'm going to do is run the program. So if I do .simple list and then put savvy Nick for a username, you can see here that we have print list, add to list, delete from list, or quit. I want to add a list. I'm going to add a item 1, and then I'm going to go ahead and add to the list again. I'm going to put item 2. I know, pretty original, isn't it? But it'll get the job done. And again, I'm going to put item 3, and I'm going to do option 1 to print our list. And you can see that there's an item 1, item 2, item 3. To get back to the menu, I type capital M or lowercase m because we provisioned for that. And then if I do 3, I'm going to delete from the list. Well, now I get 3 different items. So I can see now why I had the new line character, and I'll have to add that back in because you can see that item 0 actually lined up with this same line that we spit out to the user. So we don't want that. I'm going to actually do Control C to exit out of this program. I'm going to correct that right away. So I can see, let's go back to our list CPP file and just add back in this new line character. and that should fix things. I was trying to be fancy, but that didn't work out quite right for me. So again, I've made the change, I've saved it. I'm going to do make again, and that rebuilt my project. And then I'll run the simple list with Savvy Nick. I'll go ahead and add to the list item 1, and add to the list item 2, add to the list again item 3, and then I'm going to go ahead and print the list doing 1. You can see that I have item 1, item 2, item 3. Go back to menu and delete from the list. And now you can see putting that new line back in made it look a lot better. It says select an item, index number to delete. That's referencing this 0, 1, or 2. So let's say I want to delete item number 2. I'm just going to simply type in 1, press enter. Now I'm going to print my list again, so I'm going to do 1. As you can see, item number 2 is removed from our list, and we only have item 1 and item 3. So that function that we finished up seems to be working just fine. I'm going to go back into menu, and I'm just going to quit out of the program. Since I'm convinced it works, I am happy to go ahead and push those changes. Let's talk more in depth about that source control. Again, if we go to the source control here and we right click and do open changes, we can see the changes side by side. Since I added this new line character back in, you can see that it doesn't have the red anymore and it looks perfectly fine. But you can see green here because I added just a little bit of code in order to erase an item from the list. We also have this modified M. So what we can do is actually do a commit. So right here it says, let me expand this a little bit, message, control enter to commit on master. So we can actually commit this change, and all commit means is it's going to package everything locally and get it ready to be sent to the GitHub repository that keeps a sync of all your changes. So in here we can actually put a message in. So let's say something so we can keep track of it. We'll say episode number 6, updating our delete function, and that's good enough for me. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit this checkbox, which is commit, and it's warning us that there's no stage changes. Well, just the fact that we've modified something doesn't mean that we're ready to go ahead and send those changes down. So we're going to actually have to hit stage changes here. So right click on the file, hit stage changes, and now we should be able to hit the checkbox. And you can see that those changes have been committed locally, but they have not been pushed to the outside world yet. So let's go ahead, go to Google Chrome. I'm just going to refresh this page to kind of show you. You see right here, it hasn't said anything about episode number 6 yet. In our source file, if we look at list CPP, we're not going to see the change that we've done yet to delete item. So the next step is to push the change. So the steps that we've kind of gone through is we made a change to a file. We went ahead and staged those changes, meaning we accepted them locally. Then we went ahead and made a commit. We just locally again said that we're accepting those changes locally. And finally, the last thing we need to do is push those changes. So I'm going to go ahead and hit push. And then it's asking me for a username, so Savvy Nick is my user. And go ahead and put your password in. I got my password here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. It's going to take a moment here. And you can see down in the bottom right, I got a, would I like to install a extension and periodically run git fetch, which will just fetch any changes down. You can set this to yes or no or ask later. So I'm not going to worry about that right now. And at this point, we should have all our changes done. I'm just going to do a make clean just to clean out all the objects that were showing up here, just so I can show that we have all of our changes currently in sync. So what I can do is actually do a pull, and that will merge any changes that I have currently in Git back to my local repository. But since there is none and I have the master repository in front of me here, there aren't any changes to actually pull down. So if I go back to this GitHub repo and I do a refresh, you can see now that we have the 3 new lines added to our repository. And if we go back here, I can just look at the simple list main repo. And you can see in the source folder we have episode number 6 as our commit, updating our delete function. And that's really it, at least for the basic functions of Git source control with Visual Studio Code. Now you know how to use the source control inside of Visual Studio Code, and specifically with a Linux platform. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of C++ programming on Linux with Visual Studio Code, and I hope this has given you enough information to go ahead and use source control with Visual Studio Code. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please post them in the comments section below. Also, make sure to subscribe for future videos, and make sure to like the video. Thanks for watching.